What happens when you lose everything? A husband, a home, your honor, all stripped away because of a failing beyond your control. For Mabel, this was her harsh reality. Thrust into the center of a market like damaged goods, her hope had all but died. But then, a stranger with tired eyes and calloused hands emerged from the crowd. Their arrangement was not based on love, but on necessity. Can a family truly be built from such a harsh beginning? Her body had betrayed its duty, and for that reason, her own father had pushed her to this place. In the noisy market, she stood there, a tree that could not bear fruit, a patch of land that could not be sown. "Please, Father," Mabel whispered, her voice lost in the wind, but the man who was once her father only pushed her shoulder forward, into the center of the curious gazes. The air was thick with the smell of livestock and wood smoke, but no scent was as bitter as the shame burning in Mabel's chest. That man, the one who gave her life, was now selling her with the bitter voice of a man cornered by debt. She can cook, sew, and most importantly, she knows how to be quiet. Her price isn't even that of a young calf. Mabel's cheeks burned. The memory of the day she was dragged from the house that was once hers still ached, painful like an unhealed wound. For 2 years she had prayed, had drunk every bowl of bitter herbs the midwife gave her, useless. And then her husband married. A new wife, a cunning young girl who promised to bear the family 5 sons. Mabel was not even allowed to stay until sunset. She was thrown out that very day. Anyone? Her father barked, breaking the silence. 22 years old, still has all her teeth, just a little broken on the inside. A dreadful silence fell. Then the crowd parted. A tall figure separated himself from the curious onlookers. The man stepped forward, steady and slow. His worn shirt carried the scent of pine resin and wood dust. His calloused hands were proof of long days of ceaseless labor. His hat owed most of his face, but everyone could see the strong jaw and the tired eyes that held no cruelty. He said nothing, just silently reached into his old coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. The sound of coins hitting the wooden table rang out, dry and final, cutting off all the whispers. Not a single word of haggling, not a single question. Mabel's father raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure, sir? This item comes with no refunds." The man looked up, staring directly at Mabel for a long moment, then turned back. "At my place, no one has the right to judge her." That was all he said. Then he turned and walked away, not once looking back to see if she followed. Mabel stood frozen, her hands trembling. Was this liberation or just another cage, a little wider? The crowd was already beginning to disperse. Her father shoved her in the back. "Go on. You belong to him now." Mabel picked up her cloth satchel, which held nothing but an old pair of shoes and a locket with her mother's face inside. Then she followed the strangers back into the haze of dust. The mule cart groaned as it rolled on, pulling behind it a curtain of dust and a heavy silence. The man didn't ask and she didn't know what to say. He didn't help her onto the cart, just stood waiting silently, as if her presence was a matter. Of course, when her throat was parched from the road dust, he handed her a waterskin. The water tasted of metal and silence. They traveled on and on, across cracked stretches of land that stretched to infinity under the immense sky. Mabel glanced at the man beside her. His face was etched with the lines of sun and wind, perhaps just past 30. There was no wedding ring on the hand that held the reins, only old scars and a fresh scratch on his knuckle. Finally, the silence became too much to bear. "For what reason?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Did you choose me?" He didn't. Look at her, his eyes still fixed ahead. "4 children," he answered, his voice flat. "They need someone to care for them. I don't have time to find one the proper way." Mabel's breath caught. So she was just a governess, a hired hand. "So I will be their teacher?" This time he turned, his tired eyes looking directly at her. "No, I just need someone who will not hurt them. That is enough." Her heart pounded in her chest. It was not until dusk fell that a wooden cabin appeared, nestled amidst groves of pine and cottonwood. The front porch sagged, an old wagon wheel leaned against the barn wall, and a few chickens scattered in alarm as they approached. From behind a window curtain, 4 pairs of wary eyes peered out. 3 boys, 1 girl, all with flushed cheeks and gazes full of suspicion. "This is Miss Mabel," Silas told them, his voice void of emotion. "She will be staying here." The youngest boy, about 3, toddled out to hug his leg. Silas lifted him with one arm and opened the door with the other. "Your room is upstairs," he said to Mabel. "Warm water is in the bucket." She climbed the stairs, her legs trembling. The room was small but clean. There was only a simple bed and a single window overlooking the fields. She sat on the edge of the bed, and then the tears began to fall. She cried, but not in sobs, only her shoulders shaking softly. She did not choose this life. But for the first time in months, no one looked at her with pity. No one demanded she become something she could not be. And in this strange room, her pain was finally allowed to exist in silence. Silas's cabin was like a world of its own, self-contained and wild. Inside, the air carried a mixed scent of pine wood, of ashes in the hearth, and the sleepy smell of children. The 4 children were like little wild animals, wary and hard to tame. The eldest, Josiah, always watched her with scrutinizing eyes. Eli was always loud and hungry. The only daughter, Hannah, clung to her father's pant leg like a burr. And Benji, the youngest, just silently followed her shadow as if it were safer there. Mabel began slowly. Her first pot of porridge was burnt, and the loaf of bread she baked came out hard as a rock. Her hands, having forgotten the work of sewing, were now clumsy with every stitch. She spoke little, for her own voice still sounded too fragile. One afternoon, while trying to lift a heavy stew pot, she slipped, and the whole pot of hot food tumbled onto the dirt floor. The clattering sound startled the children. Mabel stood frozen, waiting for a shout, a slap. But Silas just walked over silently, squatted down, picked up the pot and said, "It's just a bit of food." Not a word of blame, not a hint of disappointment. That night, she sat on the porch, trying not to cry, but failed. Later, as she tucked the children in, her hands still trembled. She tried to hum an old lullaby, her voice wavering and unsteady like a dying candle flame, and then a storm came. The wind howled outside as if it wanted to tear the cabin apart. And inside, Hannah was also burning up with a fierce fever. Silas, the man who could fell a pine with a few swings of his axe, now stood helpless, watching his daughter. But Mabel did not. She acted quickly. Water was boiled. Cool claws were continuously placed on the little girl's forehead. Her hands, once trembling, were now unusually steady as she forced crushed herbs into the girl's mouth. Throughout the night, she did not sleep for a second, only whispering gentle reassurances into the child's ear. When the first rays of dawn pierced through the cracks in the walls, Hannah's fever had receded. She opened her eyes and mumbled a request for pancakes. Silas stood at the door, arms folded, saying nothing, but his jaw was slack and his shoulders had slumped. He looked at Mabel as if she had just performed something sacred. The next morning, when Mabel came downstairs, she saw a kettle boiling on the stove. On the table, next to a still steaming cup of tea, was a hastily torn piece of paper. The handwriting was stiff and uneven, with just 2 words, "Thank you." She sat on the worn bench, holding the cup in both hands. The tea was bitter with the taste of pine needles, but it warmed her chest. That afternoon, as she was mending an old shirt, Benji toddled over, looking up at her with his clear eyes. Then he raised his arms, and one word was uttered, clear as the morning sun, "Mabel." And for The first time, she smiled back, a smile not of duty, but because she herself wanted to. Spring came to the hills, chasing away the cold that had bitten deep into the land. Mabel no longer cried in the night. Her hands had grown steadier, and her voice had found its clarity. She began to teach the children their first letters with charcoal on wooden planks, helping them carefully write their names. She taught Hannah how to tie a ribbon in her hair and used old feed sacks to sew identical scarves for all 4 of them. They called her Miss May, and she never corrected them. But even as the days grew warmer, a fear still lay dormant beneath her ribs, like a bruise that had not yet faded. One afternoon, Silas asked if she wanted to ride into town with him to buy salt and some tin nails. He said nothing more, just tossed her the reins as if she belonged in that spot at the general store. While Silas waited to pay, Mabel stepped outside. The air was thick with gossip as usual. And then a sharp, cruel voice cut through the noise. "Well, look here, if it isn't the withered ghost." Mabel turned slowly. Her former mother-in-law was standing there, fanning herself with a folded newspaper. Beside her was the new wife, young and smug, wearing lace gloves and placing a hand on her stomach in a gesture that was far too practiced. "Is that her?" the young woman asked, her voice loud enough for the whole market to hear. "Yes," the older woman sneered. "Pretty but cursed. Couldn't even give us a squalling babe." "I will," the girl said, her chin high. "A big, healthy boy, and he will carry on the family name. Not like her, useless as a broken jug." Her fingernails dug deep into her palms. Her throat choked with all the words she would never say, not giving them the satisfaction of her tears, her pain, or her shame. She turned to walk away. Just then, a hand touched her shoulder. Silas. He had stepped out from the shade of the store, his boots still dusty and his eyes like storm clouds. He looked at the 2 women without blinking, then turned to Mabel. His voice was even and low. "This woman," he said, "is the only one who can soothe my daughter to sleep at night. The one who taught Benji to share instead of throwing stones. The only one who has made my house a home." The 2 women could only stand there, stunned and staring. Then Silas led Mabel away, wasting no more words. She sat in silence for the entire ride back. That night, when the children were asleep, she sat alone, silently weaving a small wreath from the wild asters she had picked by the well. She didn't know why, only that she needed to use her own hands to create something soft, soothe the sharp edges of the day. Weeks passed, and then the whispers began. The new wife, once so proud and promising, was still with child. Her belly remained flat and her voice grew sharper. Whispers turned into rumors. Truth, like a sprout, always finds a way to push through the layers of deceitful soil. Her husband found out everything. The news spread like a wildfire. He threw her out of the house, tearing down the curtains in the nursery that was never used. Then one morning, when Mabel was in town buying flour, he appeared. Her ex-husband. He looked a decade older, the hat limp in his clumsy hands. The old arrogance had been replaced by a weary, shamed look. "Mabel," he said, his voice hoarse and broken. "I was wrong. I see it now. You are the only woman who ever truly." She raised a hand, a gentle gesture but enough to stop his words. "I remember the day you let your mother insult me," she said, her voice steady now. "I remember the day you threw me out like a broken object, just because my body couldn't do what your body, as it turns out, was also powerless to do." He swallowed hard, his eyes darting about pitifully. "I was a fool." Mabel took a step forward, her voice as firm as a rock. "Now I have 4 children who run to hug me every morning. I have a man who never asks what I lack, but only cherishes what I am willing to give. My house," she paused for a moment, "it is full of warmth, laughter, and peace. I would rather light the fire in Silas's kitchen than sit and be a beautiful Doll in your wealthy house. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. She turned and walked away. From across the street, Silas was standing there, holding a sack of rice. He had seen it all, heard it all. On his face, there was no victory. Only something much deeper, gratitude and a love born not of pity, but of choice, chosen again and again, every single day. The sky was streaked with the ashen orange of a tired dusk. When Mabel stepped out to the well to fetch water for the morning, she didn't notice the man leaning against the fence that bordered their property. Jed, the trapper from down the ridge who always reeked of alcohol. "Well, look who's here," he slurred, his voice drawn out. "The pretty little bird that Silas dragged home from the market. Thought you were all dried up, but I hear you're raising his kids just fine." Mabel stiffened. "It's late, Jed. You should go home," he chuckled. "Just wanted a look. Silas keeps you locked up tighter than his coin purse." He moved faster than she expected. Before she could turn away, his hand grabbed her wrist, rough and dirty. The smell of cheap liquor and sour sweat wafted into her face. "Come on now, give us a smile after all that gossip." Before she could scream, before she could wrench free, a black shadow shot out from the barn, silent and fast as a whirlwind. Silas. Not a word of warning, not a shout. A single punch, clean and straight, to Yet's jaw. The man crumpled to the ground like a torn sack. For a moment, everything was still. Silas stood there, his chest heaving, blood trickling from his knuckles. Mabel stared, her heart pounding, but not from fear. She had never seen Silas raise his voice, let alone his hand. Jed groaned on the ground, but Silas didn't look at him. He turned to Mabel, his eyes dark and wild. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded, but her eyes were glassy. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she didn't know what she was sorry for. Silas stepped closer. He silently untied the red kerchief from his neck, then gently wrapped it around her wrist, where Yet's fingers had just left a mark. "No one touches you," he said, his voice not angry, just firm. "Unless I allow it." Inside, Mabel washed the wound on his hand with warm water and a clean scrap of cloth. The room was silent, but filled with the tension of something unnamed. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. Silas looked at her, his eyes softening. "I couldn't stand to see someone hurt you." She blinked hard, trying to stop the tears from welling up. "My tears fell," she confessed. "But not because I was scared, it was because no one has ever protected me like that." He said nothing, just looked at her as if she was something delicate, but not fragile, something worth defending. Her wrist still ached, but her heart, for the first time in years, felt held. This wasn't exactly love yet, but it had the shape of a beginning. It was the feeling of being shielded, of being cherished like a treasure. It was a morning dappled with frost, the kind that clung to fence posts and turned one's breath to smoke. She was kneading dough in the kitchen, the warmth from the hearth making the air peaceful. That peace was shattered by a heart-rending scream. From the yard, she dropped the bowl of flour and ran barefoot outside. Silas's youngest son, Benji, was crumpled near the woodpile, his leg twisted awkwardly under a large log. Nearby lay the axe, its blade stained with a streak of red. "Oh God," she whispered, dropping to her knees. Silas was already there, his face taut but his hands steady as he gently lifted the boy. "Go boil water," he commanded, his voice calm but urgent. "Get the bandages from the cupboard." She ran, her heart hammering, her hands clumsy with panic. When she returned, Silas had laid Benji on the kitchen table. The boy's pant leg was torn open, and a deep, ragged cut was oozing blood. Mabel's hands trembled as she pressed a clean cloth to the wound. Benji cried out, his face pale. "I know it hurts, baby," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know, just hold on." Her tears fell, mixing with the blood on the boy's leg as she cleaned, wrapped, and tied. In his pain, the boy's lips moved, a small voice speaking through clenched teeth. "Don't cry, mama." She froze. The word mama hung in the damp air of the kitchen. Benji blinked at her, his lips trembling. "Mama sings lullabies, just like my mother used to." Mabel cupped his cheek, her tears now flowing freely. That evening, after Benji was resting, the other children gathered by the fire. Hannah brought her a blanket. Josiah offered her a small wooden horse he had carved. "Father said," Hannah asked, "seriously, that you're staying. Does that mean ... You're our mama now?" Mabel couldn't speak, she only nodded. And they needed nothing more. That night, after the house had fallen quiet, Silas stepped out onto the porch where she sat alone under the stars. He stood there for a long time before speaking. "You know, I've never been a man of many words." She looked up. "You say enough," he nodded. "When I put that money down at the market, I just thought I was giving you a way out. I never thought I had the right to keep you here. I thought one day you would leave. And if that's what you want, I won't stop you." Mabel's heart beat strongly. "I used to think love meant being chosen at first sight," she said softly. "But now I've learned something better, to be chosen again after they have seen all of who you truly are." She stepped toward him, taking his calloused hand. "If you are not sending me away, then I am not going anywhere. I may not have given birth to these children," she said, her voice gentle, "but it was they who gave birth to a person inside me I never thought I could become." He looked at her, not with desire or guilt, but with awe, as if she were the one who had rescued him. He pulled her into his arms, not like a man claiming a prize, but like a man who had been given a second chance and was wise enough to cherish it. Outside, frost began to whiten the ground, but between them, a warmth was growing, a silent promise built not on blood, but on belonging. The morning sun, golden as honey, softly pierced through the pine needles. Mabel led Josiah, Silas's eldest son, by the hand on the dirt path leading to the one-room schoolhouse. The boy's hand was small but firm in hers, and hers was warm. With trust inside, the teacher, a thin man with oversized spectacles, was flipping through registration books. "Welcome," he said. "We just need to finalize a few papers." "What is your full name, young man?" Josiah stood up straight. "Thomas Josiah Silas." "All right, and your mother's name?" the teacher asked, his ink-dipped pen hovering over the page. There was a pause. Mabel's breath caught in her throat. Josiah looked up at her for a second, then looked back at the teacher. His voice was clear and sure. "Mabel Silas," she blinked. Her heart seemed to skip a beat. "Is that your mother's married name?" The teacher asked, slightly confused. Josiah nodded with a seriousness beyond his years. "That's what we call her." The teacher, perhaps used to the complex families of this frontier, simply smiled and carefully wrote the name down. "Very well, Mabel Silas it is." Long after they had stepped outside, Mabel still felt the sting of tears behind her eyes. She had borne many names, the daughter of a man who sold her, the wife of a man who rejected her womb before her heart. The broken one, they whispered behind her back at the market. But this name ... it was not given by law or by a man. It was spoken by a child with no reason to lie, no need to flatter. It was simply the truth. That evening, as she was folding dry laundry by the fireplace, Silas came over and set something beside her. It was a leather-bound notebook, the pages inside still pure white and smelling of new paper. He sat down beside her, his hands resting on his knees. "I don't have much to give you that isn't covered in sap or dirt," he said slowly. "But I think if anyone deserves a fresh page, it is you." She opened the notebook, running her fingers over the first blank page. "I used to dream of starting over," she said. But I never thought I would get to write the story myself. Silas nodded. Write what you want, or write nothing at all. It is yours. She turned back to the page, holding the pen like it was a promise. Then she wrote, each stroke slow and deliberate. Today, for the first time, I was loved not for what I could give birth to. She didn't need to look up. The warmth beside her, the quiet trust in the cabin, the way Josiah had said her name ... it was all real. When she finished, Silas gently took the pen from her fingers and set it down. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead softly against hers. Thank you, he murmured. For what? For staying long enough ... for us to learn how to love you right. And in that fire-warmed room, the woman once sold for less than a cow was reborn. Not by law or marriage, but by something deeper, a truth written in love. The heat poured down on the land like a melting curse. It had been nearly 2 months without a drop of rain. The ground split open like old scars, and the creek behind the house, where the children once played, was now just a weak stream of mud. The corn died first, then the beans. Silas didn't say much, but the weight on his shoulders grew heavier each day. He returned home every evening with dust in his hair and defeat in his eyes. Mabel heard the children's stomachs rumble in the night, though not one of them complained. Even the youngest had learned to be brave when there was nothing left to hope for. Mabel would not surrender to that silence. She woke when the sky was not yet light, using all her strength to pull every bucket of water from the deepest well. She carried them to the dead garden, where the ground was hard as iron rock, and patiently worked the soil, creating a space for life where life seemed to have been forgotten. Every morning she watered, every evening she checked the soil. When the young leaves sagged, she sang old lullabies as she gently poured water at their base. One afternoon, Silas staggered into the house, his face white with exhaustion, and collapsed onto the floor. He burned with fever for 2 nights. Mabel stayed by his side, wiping the sweat from his brow, spoon-feeding him thin broth. Between his fits of coughing, she told him stories of green hills and warm bread. Though her own voice trembled with fear in his delirium, his hand fumbled, searching. And he called her name, a broken and fearful call. Mabel ... Don't go ... please don't go. Her breath caught. She leaned down, her lips nearly touching his temple. I am not going anywhere, she whispered. When one is needed, and here I am needed. The fever broke at dawn. When he opened his eyes, she was there, her hair undone, a smudge of dirt on her cheek, but her hands were as warm as ever. A week later, one of the children ran in shouting, Mama May, there's a tomato. Mabel ran out. There it was. A single tomato, deep red and resilient, clinging to the vine like a challenge to the sun. Silas followed slowly. He stood beside her, staring at that single fruit. How? He asked, his voice raw. She looked at him. You were the one who taught me that not everything worthwhile comes easily. That night, they shared the tomato. 6 people, 6 slices thinner than a coin. But everyone agreed it was the best thing they had ever tasted. Later, as the children slept, Silas reached for her hand. I don't have much left to give you, he said. The land is failing, my strength is fading. All I have is this place, these kids and you. She turned to him, her smile gentle. Then that is more than enough. Because before you, I was a name no one wanted to speak. Now I have a garden that remembers my hands, children who call me home, and a man who asked me to stay even in hardship. Silas bent and kissed the calluses on her hands, as soft as rain. Outside, the sky was still waiting for forgiveness, but the garden was breathing, living, still trying. Just like her. The years flowed by like the creek behind the house, sometimes shallow, sometimes full, but the wind on the hill remained the same. It still carried the scent of dry earth, of pine needles baking in the sun, and the stubborn, Sweet smell of greens growing against all odds. Mabel's garden, once just a handful of seeds and cracked soil, now stretched wide behind the house. It was not orderly, it bent with the wind and grew in crooked lines, spilling over the rocks. But it was alive. It was hers. And every morning, Silas would stand on the porch, his hands behind his back, silently watching her tend to it. He never spoke while she worked, just stood there, quiet as always, as if witnessing a miracle that needed no loud voice to bloom. Then one spring, men in clean clothes came from the city, bringing maps and promises. "There will be a railroad," one of them said. "Right through this hill. We will pay a handsome price." Mabel stood silently beside Silas, her fingers curled under her apron. "Think of what you could give your children," the man added. "A real home, not just land and stories." Silas looked. Past them, past the papers and the easy smiles, to the garden where Mabel was bent over the vegetable beds. He saw the fence he had built with his own hands, the swing Mabel had hung from the oak tree, the stones marking where their dog was buried. Everything that had ever truly belonged to him was right there. "No," he said, his voice resolute. They tried to say more, but he raised a hand. "This land is not for sale." That evening, they hammered a wooden sign into the ground at the edge of the road. It read, "Not for sale. This place once let someone stay." Time continued to pass. Their children grew up, married, and brought grandchildren home. The house filled with noise, the smell of baking bread and the clatter of small feet. One autumn afternoon, a grandson asked Silas, "Grandpa, why do you never call it just a regular garden?" Silas walked the boy to the gate and pointed to the archway above it. Carved carefully into the wood were the words, "She did not carry his blood, but she gave birth to the rest of his life." When Mabel passed, they buried her at the foot of the garden, under the same tree where she had once hung wind chimes. On the headstone, Silas himself etched a single line, "Here grew everything she was never given, and all that she gave away." He sat by that grave every morning, until one day he did not come out. They buried him beside her, beneath the whispering tree. The garden never stopped growing. Long after the railroad was forced to curve around the hill, and the men in suits had forgotten why they had ever come, travelers would still pass the old fence and read the sign. Because sometimes the driest hills bloom most brightly for those who dared to choose love when no one else believed in it. If this story has touched a deep and true place in your heart, just as Mabel's garden bloomed where no one believed it could, then you have found the right place. Here at Western Whispers, we bring you more than just romance. We bring you grit, sacrifice, and the kind of love that can rise from the dust and endure through the storm. Stories like Mabel's and Silas's remind us that even the most barren hills can hold the deepest roots. If you want to hear more tales of devotion, defiance, and hard-earned hope, be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a single journey into the untamed heart of the American frontier. Because out here, love is never easy, but it is always worth it.